Welcome to the show. This week's episode is an absolute cracker. I'm so excited. My guest today is the amazing Inna Segal, and just you wait till I tell you a little bit about this phenomenal woman. Firstly, she is the best-selling author of The Secret Language of Your Body, which is an essential guide to health and wellness. She is also the author of other books, which she'll share with us, one of which I can tell you, though, is called The Secret Language of Color Cards. Plus, she creates decks. She's an internationally recognized healer, speaker. Her work has been supported by medical doctors and holistic doctors in multiple modalities. We're going to dive into that, don't you worry. But essentially what Inna is a pioneer in the field of energy medicine and human consciousness. And she can essentially see illnesses and blocks in people's bodies by intuitive means. And again, we will get into what that means. But from having a good look and a good feel into Inna's work, what I think she would mostly agree, and she'll tell us in her own words in a moment, that she does is she really guides people to their self-healing, which you guys know is very aligned for me. So please join me in a virtual and internal applause as we welcome to the show Inna Segal. Inna, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, excited to have this chat with you.
Yes, I am too. Now, we will get into your story and how your work came to be. But first off, I always like to ask a little bit of kind of playful, very top level, but interesting questions for people who can get an insight into your personality. So first off, if there was an animal that best described your nature, way of being, or energy, what animal would that be and why?
That's actually, I think it's funny because my husband and my daughter were playing this game and they had their perception of it, and I think that what they said, I'm just trying to remember, I think it was panther. that that I was somebody who was very leaf in a sense, or I could be very flexible with my body or with my thoughts, with my, with how I see life and experience, but I can be very fast as well. And then, I can, if I believe in something, I just pounce on it, I think, and grab it. So,
what a reflection from them. That's awesome. And would you agree with that? Would you say that's pretty accurate? Does that feel true for you?
I think I would have preferred that they said, like a horse or some animal that was more calm. But, I think that I have strong belief systems. I'm pretty direct in what I believe. I don't pretend or hide. So maybe.
That's beautiful. Well, I think the panther is a very graceful animal, to be honest. So yeah, it's interesting. Now, what would be the superpower if you could have a superpower? And let's be honest, to me, looking at your bio, reading your work, I would say you absolutely do have a superpower. I kind of know we all do, but if you could have one other than the one you have, what would be the superpower you would choose and why?
I think, for me, really it would be, in a sense, what I feel that I have and what is the possibility to develop is two different things. So I think that for me, I would want to develop, not just be given, but develop the capacity to, deeply see into the spiritual world, into the Akashic records, and really, I guess, it not just to see it, but to know that I had complete accuracy and discernment in it. And so in that the information that I could bring was, had a high level of truth in it. So that's probably what it is.
Interesting, isn't it? Like, I wanted to actually explore this concept with you a little bit later today, but this idea that we can already be so gifted and talented in something, and yet very often we still want more. And is that okay? And I think that it is, but often we judge ourselves for that or other people for that. But we'll shelve that. I love, though, that that's what you would just want to enhance the gifts that you have in the areas that you have them to be even more powerful in their use and their application, and by the sounds of it, your trust of it. So this book you've written is really phenomenal. And again, we're going to link to all of your books, all of your workshops, all of the work you do. People can immediately go and check you out. And I really strongly suggest that they do. But the book is called The Secret Language of Your Body. Now, in it, you essentially, my take on it is that you explain to people how our thoughts and emotions affect our body, essentially, and what we can do about that. I'm really curious if you can share with us, how did you get to be an author of a book like this? What was the journey that led Inna into this awareness in the first place, let alone to become a teacher of it?
So, I just want to add to that. To me, it's not just thoughts and emotions. To me, it's life experiences, and you're essentially, the way that I see it is, when there is an issue in a particular part of the body, it's almost like, we're looking at the personality traits, right? So that is the personality that creates this condition, as opposed to, and you may not have every part of that, hopefully not, but you will have, usually people will have several parts of it. And it's like, we need to actually understand it from that perspective. It's deep, it's not a surface thing. It's something that we need to overcome, and it's an opportunity to overcome. So and I'll come back to that. So well, for me, I guess what really led me towards it was, I had an experience of self-healing, and in that experience, I guess that is where I really discovered that I had this capacity to see into people's and how would I say it, subtle bodies, and at the same time, I guess to become aware of their story. What is the story that's being held? And in there, there was a lot of healing for me, and because I healed certain aspects of my physical body, from which was connected to backache, connected to psoriasis, connected to some certain digestive issues. I knew that there was validity to it, because naturally I am somebody who's very discerning, and through that I started to learn as much as I could about healing. And I also started to make connections. I started to see clients one-on-one, and I started with family, really. But I began to see connections that, whoever came to see me, if they had a problem with their heart, there were certain, like I said, certain characteristics of their personality that clearly indicated that was going to be a problem at some point, in their life. And so, because I kept seeing those connections, and I was looking for, for work that helped me to understand. And of course, like a lot of people, I found Louise Hay's book, and I thought, well, this is great. But because I was seeing people and having these in-depth experiences, that information was helpful, but it wasn't enough. I felt like people needed more than an affirmation, and they needed more in-depth explanations, and they needed to connect many pieces together. And I looked around, and at that time there was nothing like that was available. And I kind of thought to myself, what is a book that I would want to have? What's the, like, what would I want to work with? I would want to understand, the thought patterns, the behaviors, the feelings, my old patterns, I guess, that are holding me back. But I also want to understand, what do I do about that? And I'd also want to understand, how do I work with energy, through color, and how do I work with emotions, and how do I understand systems of the body, and, and diseases, but each disease is connected to a part of the body. So I just wanted to create something that was a real guide, and where people could go from one aspect to another, and it was way deeper than just saying, okay, now I love myself, because just to say it doesn't mean that that's the reality. And I really truly believe that, and again, I'm not here to say anything against what Louise did, because what she did was amazing. But what happens is that we, at different times, we're more open, or we're more understanding, or things work for us more. So when she originally wrote her book, I truly believe people were at the beginning of their journey of kind of inner exploration and making those connections. So to say an affirmation maybe 30 years ago was so powerful, and it would change things, because we weren't used to that. And it was like, oh my God, I'm actually acknowledging something, and I'm working towards something else. But we have developed so much in the last 30 years that at this point, or 40 years, I don't know how old the book is, but now it's like, we've gone through explorations of the mind, we've gone through explorations of the feelings, of energy healing. We need more, we need deeper connections. And so that's where I feel my work fits in to now.
Yeah, and I'm actually really grateful that you referenced Louise Hay, because that was something that I was going to raise with you. But just for the listeners who may not know, Louise Hay, who was one of the first, I would say, in the field work of particularly mirror work, and the body being the biology of the biography, like the map between our lives and our physiology, which has always fascinated me. And she did write amazing books like Heal Your Body and Heal Your Life, and they were reference books, not unlike yours, but there are distinctions. And it was interesting in my head, and noticing how we as humans like to reference, and you've essentially looked for patterns, and that's kind of what we do. And it can be beneficial to do it. But I immediately went, oh, it's a little bit like Louise Hay. And then equally, in reading your book and looking into it, my actual first interactions with the fact that my emotions and my body are not separate entities, and my thoughts and my body are not separate entities, actually came through the teachings of Carolyn Myss for me. So in The Anatomy of the Spirit was one of the tombs that I read that most kind of woke me up to the fact that we can use our body as a map to understand, but also use, going both ways. And I was going to ask you how you feel about the comparison, but I'm really glad you addressed that straight on. And I think the point that you make, and something I want to point out to people about your book that I think is really brilliant, is that a lot of, and further to that point, firstly, we all stand on the shoulders of the generations that came before us. So like you're saying, what she did then was revolutionary in its time. Like, even to suggest it was so probably crazy, and she probably copped a lot of like, you're a woo-woo, witch in many realms. And yet what you're now bringing, the consciousness she awakened in that space, the next generation builds on, and the next generation builds on. And I'm sure that we would hope as thought leaders in our areas that, and we know it anyway, don't we? I mean, the young people I'm working with, they're already, the concepts that we kind of had to come to awareness around, they're like, yes, and of course, and. So it's like that M field keeps going.
Into the ether, it goes into the universal ether. Yeah, absolutely.
So you're building on from it. And one of the things that I love that you've done in this book, Inna, is that unlike just looking at a issue in the body and then looking at the issue like backache, we can look in your book as a reference for the physiology, but we can also go for the emotion, which I thought was also really interesting, because a lot of people may be experiencing persistent anxiety or persistent sadness or whatever the emotion is, and you kind of can direct people either via physiology or via emotion. There are differences and nuances, and then I love that you give them like practices that are, like you say, but beyond an affirmation, that seem to be a lot more somatically based. So by somatic, I mean like in the body, again, for new listeners. So there's so many things I want to ask you. So I'm going to ask permission to kind of go off in a few different tangents, but you touched on it briefly now when you said about your, you went through a personal healing, and in the book you described that. You talk about your back pain and how that became quite debilitating, and medicine wasn't really providing much support, and then you did have your kind of, I would call, I don't know what you call that, a spiritual awakening or a realization or a divine spiritual healing. But in that, you reference something that you call the divine healing intelligence. And I would love you to share with us what that means to you, and how that plays out for all of us. Is that something we can all access? Is that what you teach? Yeah, if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think, in my own journey, I had a really powerful realization, and that realization was that I couldn't just rely on myself, and that I wasn't just a physical being. And that in my own healing journey, when one of the first things that came to me was is when I was going through it at the time, is there something divine out there, and can I surrender my limitation, my frustration, my will, essentially, in some ways, and open myself to something higher? And can that connect with me? Because I feel, and it was really interesting because I was at a workshop last weekend, and there was a doctor who was probably one of the most spiritual people that I've met, and she was saying, so many people are under the impression that we're a physical being trying to find something spiritual, some spiritual connection. And she was saying, it's like, we have forgotten that we are a spiritual being, essentially trying to find a way to, optimize our experience in some way, or learn or grow in a physical world. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was that same experience, that I had a realization, that I am this deeply spiritual being, but I don't really know that part of myself, and I don't know what that, means. And I've gone on a really profound journey of trying to figure that out, and it's been, what I say to people essentially is, you actually have to sit with that, with what that means, because what it means to me is going to be so different to what it means to someone else. And essentially also what it means to me today is totally different to what it meant to me when I wrote about it. It's part of something that my husband and I have spent years and years trying to understand. What does this divine intelligence mean? Does it mean that it's your higher self? Does it mean, and what does it mean to have your higher self? Is that, a development of your spirit, and is it conscious? What does it mean to have a connection to your angel, and your guardian angel, and what understanding do we have around it, and what does it mean to, or do we go higher? Is it a connection to an archangel? Is it connection to, the divine trinity? What does it mean to you is the real question, and I feel like how when you found something that connects is that there is a feeling of awe. It's like I have a sense of awe around something that is deeper, more profound, higher than my own mind.
Yes, I would agree completely. And as I share openly with my tribe, as someone who used to be very much, for the majority of her life, of the mind, and trained to lean heavily into the intellect of the mind, when I had my own, whatever we want to call it, divine awareness or awakening, but definitely that awe-inspired moment of awareness of that which I am beyond my skin suit about 7 years ago. It was precisely that. It was almost shockingly apparent that the reality we live in is not the only reality available to us. So with that in mind, and the fact that, this is about healing, and the fact that the body is a vehicle for that, and it's like all aspects affect the whole, right? Like all parts affect the whole. So we can use all of the tools. And you obviously managed to heal your own physical ailment, and then went on, as you said, to start to notice and then become more confident in being able to see. And so let me back up. Let me ask you this straight up. what do you feel intuition is? Because you talk about being and seeing illnesses and being a healer through your powers of intuition. Or, well, I'm sorry, I'm taking that, please tell me if it's incorrect in my wording there, but I'm taking that from bios and things like that. So would you identify as an intuitive, and what does that mean to you?
And again, it's the same thing as, I would say divine intelligence. It has been a journey, a really deep journey of exploration, because, of course, originally when I had the experience of awakening that capacity, I started looking around and, who has something similar. And of course, whilst Louise Hay wrote the book, she didn't have those capacities. So she obviously researched it and got information from other people, that did not come from her. Whereas Caroline Myss, who you mentioned, had those capacities and the information did come from her, and when I actually, I guess, looked into what she could do and what I could do, it was extremely similar.
Okay.
Yeah. Our ability and how we both understood it and, what we saw. And, in that sense, there was, obviously there was an intuitive aspect involved, but, later on I realized that, there's intuition, and then you have to also refine and discern that, and I guess my understanding changed of what intuition could be, so there is an intuition that is basic, which is the body, like you said, I can learn to tune into the body. I really believe that most of us can do that. I've taught that, I've seen it. I feel like that is something that has been given to all of us if we can let go of the lack of belief or, the limitations that we've put onto ourselves. So intuitively connecting to the body, I feel, yes, that's something that I developed a lot, and that's a gift. It's also a capacity. It's also, I've done a lot of work to develop it. Yeah. But then, to me, there's different levels of intuition, so there's intuition of having an understanding of who we are on this world, which what I was saying to you originally, which means to me personally, having the capacity to connect to the spiritual world, which to me is a home, a real home, and receive deeper information from there. And I feel like that needs much, much more development than to learn to tune into your body. Yes. To understand, like working with me, so there's the body intuition, then there's, my surrounding, to know who should I be with, who are the people that are, I should have a relationship with. That's also, to me, is the basic of what we have and can be developed more easily than if we truly want to develop more clairvoyant type of capacity, which to me, what I do is not really clairvoyant, because I'm basically looking at what's there, right? I'm not really connecting into the spiritual world. I'm not really connecting into in a sense, the astral world. I'm basically looking at what's there. And can I predict somebody else's behavior? 90% yes, just because of how people are and of seeing things, but there's still 10% where you can't, because nobody knows, right? And not even, the best clairvoyant. So to me, I'm one of those people who likes to be extremely detailed. And as I get older, I feel even more and more, I'm pedantic about details, and understanding them. So I'm still always learning. So like I said, I just went and did a course on embryology, to understand what that means and what, what that looks like for us, and how as we're growing as a baby, that all kind of, I guess later on in our lives, it all reflects, what the possibilities are. And it's incredible, because it reflects all the possibilities of the spiritual world and us understanding our soul and our spirit and how it all combines, and it's shown in this first few months of our life. So to me, I think there are many exercises to develop your intuition. Some of them take shortcuts. I don't believe in shortcuts. I've taken many and seen what happens when you do that. So I really believe in doing the work to develop it.
What would you suggest? So what I'm hearing is that intuition is essentially your ability to connect to whatever you call divine intelligence, or the part of us that isn't, and that's a muscle. And I personally agree with you. So as someone with the skills that you have, I'm so glad to hear that, because I really do believe that it's that blend of grace and grit. Like, to get more grace, sometimes it takes a bit of that human grit to go, this is a muscle I'm going to work, and I'm going to practice my discernment, and I'm going to notice when I thought I was right, but actually I end up being wrong. And I'm going to tap into all the senses that indicated that, and I'm just going to file that as an awareness. And next time, and again, like you've done, look for the patterns, right? And over time, it's like, oh, I'm developing that nuance that gives me more confidence to know which is which. And certainly for myself, I was very critical in accepting my intuition as it expanded, kind of just brushing it off as it's not real, until eventually it just became harder and harder to do. And I would almost, I say, and excuse my language, but I would used to sort of shit test myself on it, to the point where it was like, well, I've definitely proved it now, so now I can rely on it a bit more. But in some ways, I think that's kind of a healthy practice. And it sounds like, that even with your enhanced skills, that's still something that you do, is like always, you're always discerning. So my question there is, if it's a skill that can be enhanced and that can be worked on, what would be the 3 basic, or your favorite tips to say to people, what, if you want to work on your intuition, if you want to start to be able to, and I teach wholeness and self-sovereignty. So I'm always talking to people to kind of go within and find the answers here before letting the noise necessarily bombard us from outside. So what would be your top 3 suggestions for people to begin the journey of enhancing their intuition?
For me, it's again, depending on what we're talking about, but let's say we're talking about, starting with the basics, which is the body, so it's really about, I say to people, breath. So actually becoming aware of how you breathe. And I'm not a person who's into forced breathing, because again, that's another exploration, but more just, how am I breathing? Am I in my head? Am I in my body? So a big part of it is, how do I ground and keep coming back into my body? Because I'm just not going to get any information if I'm not really connecting that, of real substance. And then the next part is touch. I really believe that we need to touch to create the connections, especially at the beginning of the exploration. And the next part is asking questions. And the questions are not, why is this happening to me? Because that comes from a total victimhood. But the questions are, what is it that you're trying to give me as a possibility to grow? So those are the starting points. If we really want to go deeper into awakening our intuitive capacity, which I believe is it's part of evolution, it's what we are meant to do, so then I really feel that the first area that we need to work on is the heart, and it starts with the fact that so many, if we look at depression, to me, that's a total disconnect from the heart. Right. So if we really look at what's happening, in the world, heart disease, depression, anxiety, the top issues, cancer, obviously. And when I come back and go, well, if I look at what's showing up, to me, there is a disconnect, disassociation disorder, all of that's a heart issue. And whilst, I'm big into healthy eating and detoxing and all of that stuff, I don't feel that you can detox it out from just doing the physical stuff. I feel like we need to start to reconnect, one, to the heart. And again, most people's experience or understanding of the heart is the fantasy Hollywood love story that nobody's really experiencing. Even the characters, in the movie, usually the movie stops once they get together, but then what happens, right? That's when the real work begins. And so to me, it's about intimacy, and my husband and I would teach about that, and we try and practice it as much as possible, because it's not easy, to keep exploring and opening and connecting to the most vulnerable aspects of your heart is difficult, because it brings up fear, and it brings up pain, and it brings up every part of you that wants to hide and run, but at the same time, that is where the deepest wisdom of our life purpose, our destiny is stored. And so, but it's protected. And so we have to become courageous, and it starts from there. And then there's many deep exercises, that you can do around refining and transforming and healing, those parts of yourself, and growing and kind of, expanding. But we can't go there before we actually do step one, because I've seen when people jump that step and they just go, all right, give me the exercises to refine. And that's great, but they're still getting to their head, whereas intuition and healing, the deepest healing, does not come from the head, it comes from the heart. So, we're in that interesting phase where people are, it's like they want to, but they're so terrified of it. Thus, we see the fear turning to depression, anxiety, and disassociation, and, a host of other mental disorders. But they're not really mental, they're heart disorders.
Yes. I couldn't agree more. I'm on the same page, and very much in that work as well. So what I'm hearing you say around the first two things that you suggested around breath and touch is it really requires a deep level of presence, doesn't it? And that's perhaps why so many people are not accessing their intuition, is because in this day and age, it's busy, externally focused, more distraction, more apps, shorter attention spans. It's like literally the world is wiring us to be anywhere but in our skin suit, with our energetic centers and with our breath. So I agree with you around that so much. And it kind of leads to something I wanted to talk to you about, and it's something you talk about in the book, and it's like the purpose of the pain. It's the purpose of the issue, if you will, or the pathology. Because I'm 1000% agree that life happens for us and not to us if we're present to the gift and the learning. So I've got twofold to this question, and maybe we should separate them. But again, I kind of first got attuned to this through the readings of Carolyn Myss, because she would talk about women having breast cancer, and that being a rejection of nurturing their own self, or the rejection of their feminine. And there would be very kind of quite literal parallels often, people with prostate issues or bowel issues or whatever it is would be, that they're shit off and they're not expressing it, and it's getting clocked into the body. And I remember just being like, oh, it's just so obvious, this map, it's like so true and so relevant. And yet I feel like for people who are really ill and struggling with a pathology, there might be, and I'm sure, I don't know, is this true? Have you found this, that sometimes people are very resistant to the fact that their life, their choices, their behavior is bringing that to a pain point for the purpose of potentially releasing it or addressing it? I don't know. Do people resist that awareness? But more importantly, can you speak to this what is the purpose of the pain in the body? What have you learned over time? Why do we get these pathologies? Are they really gifts that we need to unpack, or is there something else at play?
Well, my belief, and from everything that I have experienced, seen, and observed, has been that essentially, we have a spirit, we have a soul, we have a body. This energy body is involved there as well. But the soul is the mediator between the spirit and the physical body. And the soul is, in a sense, our sense of self. In that, the soul brings with it the possibility for evolution. The only thing that makes sense to me of even being here is that we're evolving and we're learning something new. And I've studied this a lot, from the beginning of time, but really I don't have to go to the beginning of time to reflect on it, because I can go to the last 30 years and there's been this massive evolution, from how we have, or 40 years, however many years it is, how we have treated people with a different skin color, to how far we've come from that, to the fact that we couldn't live together. If you live together with your partner and not being married 40 years ago or 30 years ago, that was like, oh my God. And now if you decide to get married and you haven't lived with them, it's almost like, are you insane? Right? We have changed so much. So to me, it's like nothing is wasted and nothing is for no reason. I believe that there is, yes, we look at things and we see chaos, but when you actually start to understand even something like embryology, there has to be chaos for us to even be born, in all the cells and how the organs get formed. So what I see is that the soul comes with an agenda, and that agenda comes through from how our organs are even formed inside the body. And that most of us, I would say majority of people, if not all, are born with some kind of weakness inside the body now, and that weakness might show up early in your life, might show up later in your life, depends on how you live your life, right? And what it's essentially saying is, hey, there is an aspect of you that needs to be looked at, acknowledged, transformed, and refined. Now, some people are more sensitized, which means that they don't need to have cancer or let it become a tumor or, or some horrible disease and, be in major pain to learn that lesson, or to learn that. I don't even know if it's a lesson. I think, that capacity to go beyond something that we've been given. It's like, can I go beyond and refine and get to another capacity that I didn't have when I came here? And other people, they're, like you said, they have massive, major resistance, and they cannot hear when the knock on the door is very subtle, so they need a louder and a louder knock. And usually that has to come through pain, because like you said, they're too busy. They're out in the world, being chaotic and just trying to do a million things. We've all experienced it, and the body through the soul essentially brings you back. Because from my understanding and study of this, it's the physical body does not give you pain. It's the astral body, which is part of the soul and part of the nervous system, that sends the pain, because it's the body of senses, sensations. So the physical body is essentially there as a structure to hold, whatever else is going on, and to show us, no, not on the right track. No, this is not working. Or yes, you're doing well. How else would we know? how else would we know if we didn't have some way of the body saying to us, hey, this is not the way to go, or stop, look within. Most people, and that also brings me into a major topic, which is, do we believe that we have one life or multiple lives?
So what's your take on that?
My take on it is that if you believe that you have one life, you're way less likely to do any work on yourself, because all you're going to do is go, let's just have fun, let's party. I'm only having this one experience, so I just want to have as much pleasure as I can. Why work on yourself? Because that's painful and that's hard. Can we just keep coming back to, let's go dancing, let's go and have fun? Why would I sit there and do self-reflection and connect and try to transform? That's not fun for most people, right? But if we start to, and also there's a massive pressure, so we become very materialistic. We become really focused on, what am I going to get out of this? I don't care about you, because it's all about me, right? It's all about how much can I take out of this one little experience of life. When we understand that there's multiple earth lives, we start to go, okay, so if that's true, then everything I do, I have to be responsible for, because there's going to be consequence of what I'm doing, and how I'm behaving and how I'm being. And actually the only thing, if you really, really, truly think into it, the only thing that makes sense of why we'd even be here is that somehow we're here to discover, how do we get to develop more and more of the different aspects of our soul and spirit? And if we look back, how we were in Egyptian times is not how we are now. And the question is why? How we were in Atlantis is not how we are now. How we were in the height of Greek Roman times, where everybody believed in Zeus and, they made this amazing statues and that amazing art, is not how we are now. So when we start to look at and ask those deeper questions, we actually get to a place of going, well, if I understand that I am unique and different to everybody else, and then my journey is not the same as other people, I stop competing. I take myself out of trying to be like somebody else. I take myself out of going, I have to get every possible little thing out of this life. And I start asking new questions. And those questions are, how do I develop eternal qualities? What is eternal? How do I refine different aspects of myself? What does that look like? How do I move forward? Where does, what is important? Is it really important for me to get as successful and wealthy as I can be and have as many things so other people look at me and go, wow, you're a success? Or is the most important thing for me to develop inner wealth, inner richness by feeling, connecting to my body, being in my body, and really sensitizing and overcoming things that develop more strength in myself? And does that strength then come back to me in the future incarnation? Or if I do nothing and I don't learn anything, do I bring that back? So we start to ask very different questions, and we stop being in survival type existence, and we stop being animalistic, which means, survival of the fetus. I don't care about you, I just care about me. As opposed to, well, actually, to care about me, I also need to care about you.
So it's kind of that long game versus a short game, and the collective versus the individual concepts. Yeah, I think that's true. And based on where we place our perspective, we're absolutely, as you've already pointed out so beautifully, there were some of those questions going to shift the quality and also the context of the questions. And I'm a firm believer in the quality of the questions dictates the quality of our lives, right? And the richness and depth. I'm curious, and for particularly listeners who are like, okay, well, if someone, and I don't know if you identify as a medical mystic or just someone with insight into the map of the body, I myself have often wondered, just from a pure curiosity point of view, does that mean, from your perspective, when you walk about the world, that you would see someone, and then, because I know in the book you tell a story where you saw a friend and you saw a liver above their head and you thought you were having a delusion for a moment, and then it was very early in your career is the retelling of this story. But I mean, I get curious. I sort of start to go, well, what would it be like to have that power, that gift, but also would that ever feel not always like a gift? I suppose I'm wondering, can it be turned off? Does it present itself all the time? I'm genuinely curious. Is this something that's like a flowing river that you have no control over? Can you turn it on? Can you turn it off? Can you tell us a little bit about how your gift really shows up in real time for you on a day-to-day? Because there might be people out there who've got similar things happening and don't know what it means, and then for other people who are like, well, this all just sounds a bit crazy. What's she actually capable of, and what really happens? I'm curious, for you, with the gifts you have, what does that look like day to day, and how do you know that something pertains to someone? Is it always available to you? Yeah. Does that, I know that's a bit of a muddled question, but I'm hoping you can pick up the sense.
Well, yeah, I think originally when it happened, it was so surprising and I didn't really know how to, which I got myself into a few little challenges doing that. But usually, let's say, unless I'm staring at someone for long periods of time, or somehow in my inner being I've gone, I just want to tune into them for a second, and it could be almost subconscious. Mm-hmm. So that, whatever I guess, is going on for them can show up. But mostly, unless I'm consciously deciding to do that, I can be hanging out or spending time with people and not be aware of it at all, but there could be a moment where they're asking something and the nature of the question just turns it on. Yeah. So it's not like, I wouldn't say that I have 100% full control over it, or if I'm sitting in a big group of people and I'm just trying to, and somebody's speaking and I'm trying to get a deeper understanding of what they're saying, something could show up, around them. Or if I'm very visual. So for me, it's most like, let's say it's 70% visual, but in those moments where I'm not doing it consciously, it could show up as a feeling more, and that's probably more of the thing that shows up when I'm around people. I just start feeling it, I feel what's going on with them. And sometimes, it'll be a word or a thought that comes into my head and it's very persistent and it won't leave, and obviously there's times where I would ask myself, well, is this just something coming from me, or is this from them? Or, there's teachers that I want to learn from, and I'm very pedantic about who I learn from. So, which I think sometimes drives my husband crazy as well, because we have different capacities in that. And I have very high, I guess, ideals about, if I'm sitting with someone and spending a lot of time, trying to learn from them what they need to be like in their life. And so occasionally I'll just tune into their etheric body, because that gives me a lot of information. And so I won't actually tune into what's going on in their life, because that's not appropriate, and it's not a thing that they didn't ask me. But the etheric body is essentially their life body, and it shows me their level of connection and being inside their body. It shows me the level of flexibility. It shows me how much light is in there, as opposed to what they say it is. It shows me how much they've really worked on themselves. So it's quite easy to tell.
And so you called that the etheric body. Is that what you just called it then? Yes. And so is that similar to like sensing auras? Some people can sense an aura. Is it similar to that in the way that you can actually, and listening to you, so it's funny because when you were saying it, I was like, oh, so it's not like Inna's walking around and every human has like an organ above their head,
No.
What I kind of tapped into is more that it's like, I suppose, like anything that we all can have the capacity to develop, but it's like there's a radio frequency that you can dial into and dial out of, and that you either do it consciously, and sometimes it might just start playing because you're someone who listens to that radio station frequently. So that makes sense to me. And I imagine it's, like I have this phrase that we talk about, like a blessing and a curse. I'm sure at times it's like, oh, I'm so glad I get to have a little peep in there and suss it out. And then sometimes I'm sure you're like, oh, ignorance is bliss, or what, rather wish I didn't know. But I think overall, I would think it's a blessing and a gift. But, I'm wondering in your life, how often you come across people who feel, and I really dislike this term, but I use it because everyone seems to have a reference for it when we say, oh, that's very woo-woo, in this world where we're all overly active in our very unreliable minds. But in any case, this idea of what's woo-woo. And yet I do know that your work has been quite acknowledged in the medical field and the holistic field. So I'm wondering if you can speak to potentially how that's been acknowledged or supported, like where your skill set and potentially more classical or traditional or scientifically backed stuff actually has aligned. Does that happen? And can you share any stories with us?
Yeah, so I think, first, just to answer the first part of what you asked, the etheric body is not the same as seeing the aura. So mostly you see the astral body as the aura, not the etheric body, or the soul aspect. The etheric body is deeper, and there's, again, you have to learn how to discern. It's part of the refinement of your own capacities, I guess. So the astral body is more about your personality, and your likes and dislikes and all the sensations that you feel, whereas the etheric body is more about your life force and holding things and how much you can stretch in terms of your capacity to grow and evolve.
Wow.
So they're different.
That's really, but you can sense those subtle bodies.
Yeah. I think coming back, for me, I think it was, I've always had a discernment, as I said, and I've never been, I've always sat with something for a while and tried to look at how is this logical? How does this actually make logical sense? So I've never been, okay, well, this is just my vision and I expect everybody to trust it. I've gone, okay, well, this is what I feel has come to me, but how does this connect to something? If somebody asked me a question, how could I break that down and help people understand that there is a logical explanation and connection with it? And I think, for me, in terms of the medical profession and the, alternative healing, what I originally did was I had a lot of clients, who were both, who were nurses, psychologists, doctors, healers from every modality you can imagine. And so I actually just, when I first wrote the draft of the book, I sent it to them. And I said, I just want your, chiropractic, every modality that I had access to. And I just said to them, I'm trying to create something that connects as many pieces as possible for somebody to do self-healing at home. And what I need from you is to give me feedback, and from your feedback and Chinese medicine, everything, from your feedback, I can sit back before the book is published and reflect on it and go, does this make sense? Or have I made mistakes? because how I wrote the book was very much two ways, similar to what you said with Carolyn Mace. I looked at what does this part of the body do? What is the function of it? And based on that function, as well as the information I got from tuning into people from all over the world with that issue, I kind of, came up with like I said, an understanding of what kind of personality or what thoughts, feelings, experiences create that particular situation inside the body. But it was very two-way connected, and so because I did it in a way of going, hey, I want everybody's input once I wrote it, the feedback that came, that was coming back was so positive. And there were, I think, slight little adjustments that, certain people said to me, maybe you can look at this, or that, which I did at the time, that, just to make it a bit more refined, clear. But majority of people came back and just went, wow, that's amazing. That makes sense to me, and obviously I connected with, doctors like Christian Northrope and, who's done so much work around femininity, and intuition in that sense that, we're talking about the body and healing. And, she was one of the people that I was asking for feedback, and then there was Dr. Inna Segal, who had written so many books on how miracles can happen in healing and stuff. And, I went to him and I was like, well, can you look through this and tell me what your understanding is, and then several doctors that I knew, and again, they all came back with really positive, I guess, feedback, because around the time when I wrote the book, which was quite a few years ago, is when the whole mind-body emotional connection was beginning to, make more sense to the medical community. And they were going, well, stress causes this, and if you're really angry, you could have these, anxiety and so on symptoms. And the liver and the Chinese medicine that's been around for God knows how long, we're saying, well, the liver has anger, we know that, and the kidneys has this deep sadness. And so there was so many connected, pieces. And so that I very, very rarely have experienced, and I think with my own belief and experience, and thousands of people giving me feedback on how they've used my work, I haven't had a lot of experience of skepticism, except when I've been on TV in Australia. That's the only time really that I can think of. Most of the experiences that I've had, also I've done a lot of TV and radio and so on in other countries, and I've never had people be doubtful or skeptical except in Australia, which is interesting, But at the same time, one of my first experiences that, I was 25, and this is before I wrote the book, and I was invited to go on Channel 7 morning show. And I realized, a couple of days before that they were going to do this whole skeptical thing. And, I remember being really nervous and thinking, oh my God, my career is like literally going to end before it even began, truly, because they're going to make me look like a total, like you said, woo-woo person. And, and it was so interesting because on the day, when we were doing, I think the first day they were going to do this quick interview, and the second day they had these 3 people organized, and I was meant to not see them in 2 minutes, just do this healing and heal them, distance healing. And I was like, oh my God, this is so unrealistic. So anyway, when I got into the studio, there was this lady and she was doing my hair, and I was very nervous, and she said to me, oh, I know that you've been, doing this work for a while, can you, like, I've just had a really challenging time. Can you tune into me? As, you know, she was doing my hair. And I was like, okay, yeah. And so I did, and I told her several things, and she said, oh my God, wow, that's just like totally spot on, completely accurate. And I said to her, okay, cool. Thank you. You know, you just made me feel better. You know, then I got on TV and I just said to him, you know what? I know what you want to do. I know what you want me to do. And you're giving me 2.5 minutes. So I'm just going to do a guided process, because it's not about the two people. One, you're asking me to instantly make somebody quit smoking. That's not realistic. So what I'm interested in doing is just giving people a process, and then let's see who at home gets to have an experience. You know, so I did that, and then, you know, I got off. So I finished that 2-minute segment, and this lady was in the studio, and she said, oh, like, my back's really hurting, blah, blah. And I just went, you know what, we're sitting here, can I just send you some healing? And she was like, yeah, please do. And so I did. And within minutes, she said, oh my God, I feel so much better. I feel so different. And I said to her, okay, could you do me a favor? Would you be willing to say this to the producers? Because obviously they're trying to make me look like an idiot. So are you willing to just tell them? And so maybe they do another segment at the end saying, hey, this is a person that works for us, and Inna's just done this, and she's saying that it works. And she said, yeah, definitely. So we went to the producers, and they said, okay, all right, before we end, we'll interview her and ask her. And so at the end, she actually ended up, you know, saying, yeah, this works, and rah, rah. So I've just found that if we have faith and trust, and we're really doing things that we're believing in, then the skepticism is not a big problem, and it's not something, you know, I don't give it any energy to it. And
well, that's it, isn't it? And you know, that leads really to this point, 2 points, I suppose, for a lot of my audience. Not all of them are entrepreneurs, but as someone who does business coaching and helps people launch into, or come into alignment with self, which sometimes means coming into birthing whatever it is you're meant to birth in the world. So often what we get caught up on, all of us, you know, whether it's staying in a career or starting something new, is this idea of, what about the critics, right? What about the people who aren't in alignment, who don't want it, who disagree or want other things? And yet, you know, as you've so beautifully pointed out, when we do the work that we're here to do, whoever's here to receive it will receive it. And so the critics can be in that, you know, the critics were sitting also in that studio, right? Sitting there going, oh, isn't this great? We're going to point out how ridiculous this is. And yet, just doing what you do, showing up, doing what you do, people who are open and ready to receive the gifts of your gift are going to get it anyway. And I think for anyone listening, that's a great reminder, is that don't pay attention to the critics. Just keep on your course and keep doing your magic and keep showing up in the ways that you feel called to show up, so that people who are willing to receive it, you get to be of service to them. I'm sure that, you know, there are a lot of people out there who often need reminding of that, you know, myself included. You know, we can get hung up on who's not in alignment or supporting us.
And I've always, I just want to, you know, say on that, I've always used other people for inspiration, like you're saying, to be able to do that. Because so often people have said to me, you know, you're so courageous, you know, you've traveled the world, you know, I've had governments who've sponsored me to come to their city and actually would let me come into the government building, promoted, you know, on all the TV stations in different countries. So which was amazing. But I'm like, at the end of the day, what I've done whenever I've been afraid to do something, which at times has happened, I've actually looked at different people. And in particular, I have looked at my grandparents and the life that they had. And my grandmother survived on her own for 4 years when she was 13 in Russia in the war. And she, her mother was killed in front of her. You know, she was one of 7, and she actually was the only one who survived. And her mother was very psychic, and she told her that was going to happen. But the courage that it took her to do what she did has always inspired me. And whenever I've gone, okay, like, what am I afraid of? I'm afraid of getting on a radio show or a TV show or going to a country that I don't know and having people be skeptical. How does that compare to what my grandmother has gone through, which is true courage? And whenever I've asked myself that question, I've gone, it doesn't. Like, so what am I worried about? You know, somebody doesn't like what I do, but there's all the people who like it, you know, so am I going to put my energy into those who don't, or am I going to actually feed and inspire the ones who do?
Oh, I love that story so much, for so many reasons, not the least of which is, you know, the work I do in family constellations and family systems. And I 1,000% know that we do stand on the shoulders of some seriously brave, courageous, and amazing ancestors, right? And that they suffered and struggled so that we don't have to. And you're quite right. So much of what we fear today is really a privilege. Like the things that we get to be quote unquote afraid of are first world problems. They really are first world problems. And yeah, I got chills when you shared that story about your grandmother. That is yeah, we live in a time where, for particularly if we live in Australia or a first world country, we don't have the capacity to truly comprehend the size and impact of those kind of challenges. You know, we're privileged enough to not have to consider those kind of challenges. I think that's a great way to frame it. You know, not that we need to feel guilt or shame that we're so privileged, but it's beautiful the way you utilize it to be like, you know what, and therefore I'm brave enough to do this. And I also think one of the things that I found really valuable to learn in my life young is, you know, we should be less concerned about the opinions of people whose opinion we don't actually value. You know, so meaning if someone is not someone that you revere and think is amazing in their alignment and their embodiment and who they be in the world, then be also less concerned about what they think of you. You know, yet we often do, don't we? We worry about the unknown people or the people who we don't actually think highly of. Why would we worry what they think about us in that situation? Yeah. So I mean, if you were going to summarize, I mean, well, not even summarize, you know, we're filming this and it will come out in a little bit, but we're filming this right in the very middle of the coronavirus. This is something the world has not seen. It's certainly shown multiple aspects, I think, multiple facets of human nature, certainly our animalistic fear responses and also our deep connectedness. I think there's absolutely both sides present. But we are also in a reality where people are afraid for their basic health and their immunity and that of their loved ones. So what would be your advice at this time to people who want to stay strong in their bodies and their souls and their spirits' health? What would be your advice or your suggestion? Where should they start?
I really think that we have to start with the focus, you know, and really going, where is my focus going most of the time? And honestly, I've had to be in, I never watch the news. It's something that I just don't do. But because I've had events coming up, you know, live events, I've had to do that, you know, just to be aware of, you know, what are the things that the government is saying that is okay and not okay, basically. And that's been really traumatizing in some way and challenging because the depth of fear that's being sent out is so massive, you know, and every day it's almost like, let's build on it and let's keep showing these images of people, you know, and let's isolate ourselves and all of that stuff. And I know clearly, deeply from, you know, studying this for a long time, that fear is the thing that destroys your nervous system. And then that, you know, also destroys your immune system. And so I understand that we have to be aware to certain degrees, because we need to know how to move around and what to do, what's okay and what's not okay at this point, even though that challenges me to even say that, but that's where we're at. But at the same time, you know, if you're going to be in a situation where you have more time, you have to be so conscious of what you're thinking about, you know, and what you're focusing on. Because if we're thinking about fear all day long, then when we go to bed, we have these images that literally, remember I said that if their body is a life body, that literally go into the depth of our subconscious, into the depth of our inner being, and create a weakness where we're actually likely to get the disease that we're so scared about, you know. And so to me, it's about going, all right, extra time means extra connection to the body, extra love, extra understanding. You know, how can you use the time you have wisely, which is actually one of the reasons. It was funny that this year I've been very resistant to doing online training, because it's not the same as live training, you know, and there's some things you absolutely can't do online that you can do live, but then there's things that you don't have time to do live that you can do online as well, you know. And there's things that online can, you know, you can go back and listen to again, or, you know, you can continue to do meditations, which I really encourage, you know, healing meditation, it's the time to do them. So I've created audios, I've created online programs, and it's really interesting, again, the timing, that we can go, hey, I'm getting weaker and I'm so afraid, or you can go, great, I have time to really understand more about myself. So okay, I can't go anywhere because the government says that I can't, except I still think you need to go and spend time in nature and get, you know, and be outside. But it is also an opportunity for learning and going, hey, how do I develop a practice? You know, and here I have some time at home. How do I develop a practice with myself? How do I develop practice with my intimate partner? How do I develop a practice with my children? You know, so like you said, there's two sides to this story. And maybe, you know, we start with actually having a conversation at home. Let's talk about our feelings. Let's talk about our belief systems. Let's help each other to find a new point of view on this. You know, let's talk about the things that we don't talk about, usually because we're too busy. You know, let's create a meditation that we all do together, or let's get an online program, you know, that helps you with whatever it is that you want to help with, whether it's mine that helps you with connecting to the body and understanding how to work with yourself and develop your intuitive capacities and develop, you know, and work on your emotions and, you know, work with my book and all of that. Because, you know, I always say to really do that, you have to have time. So use the time, or maybe it's developing a skill that you have gone, you know, I don't have time for this, and now you do. Yeah. So we can all go into fear, you know, and this is the end of the world and it's so horrible. Easy to do. It's always easy to do that, you know. Or we can go, great, what do I get to do for myself to strengthen my immune system, you know, to strengthen my capacity to think, to open my heart. This is the best time ever.
So yeah, choosing to see the high vibration, the opportunity side of things, because that's the free will piece, isn't it? We get to choose. But I agree. I feel that, you know, this pause, if you will, in the regular programming of life is going to gift people, if they seize it, such an opportunity to create new ways of being, because we're forced to not just be able to enact our regular patterns. And I agree, get online, go and learn something from someone who's got amazing gifts. Go check out Inna's work, read her book, get into some of these daily practices, because these tiny little daily practices, a 5-minute meditation, breathing, centering, asking better questions, they're not little things. They're tiny things that actually ripple like massively into your life, and could in a year's time be the thing you look back and go, wow, my entire life, my entire reality, my entire experience has shifted because I implemented that one daily habit. And I think we underestimate sometimes daily habits. So I want to move into some quick fire questions as we wrap up today. But I wanted to know, firstly, for you personally, what are you most grateful for right now in your life?
I'm grateful for, I think, my spiritual understanding in the deepest way, because that's the thing that helps me to strengthen and to come back to what is the most important. Obviously, I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for living in this country. You know, I'm grateful for having the house that I live in. You know, I'm grateful for the friendships that I have. You know, I'm grateful for being able to help other people and you know, grow and learn and awaken people. That's probably one of the things I'm most grateful for.
So beautiful. And what's one thing that for yourself, in, you know, even the fact that you obviously have highly developed skills in areas that some people can only hope to, but as you've also mentioned, you're still a human and it's an ongoing journey. And I loved earlier that you mentioned you're learning about this and that, because I personally hold the belief that the best teachers in the world are always choosing to be students as they continue to enhance their own awareness. But for yourself right now, what would you say you're personally working on in your life for you? Like, what's something that you're like, yeah, I'm honing that skill, I'm getting better at that, I'm facing off with that thing?
Many things, because I always feel like things are showing up constantly. I feel that for me the really deep thing is intimacy, you know, and how do we have deeper, more honest and more loving intimacy. And that's probably been the biggest focus for me for several years, you know, and in that, you know, in that having a mirror to go back and go, oh my God, I really thought that I was developed in this area, but actually not, you know, or today I'm not. Yesterday I was, you know, yesterday I did really well with this situation, but today I'm not doing well because I'm tired or this is happening. And I've just, so in the deepest way, I would say, I believe that we have different aspects of our being, and that sense of self or the ego or my I am, you know, has two sides. It has a deeply selfish side, you know, and this is just for me and what I want. And then it has the highest spiritual potential of awakening the spirit, you know, your spirit, your higher self. And in that, in the individualization of that, in the strengthening of that aspect, we're able to respond rather than react. You know, and for me, I think being, you know, my husband and I are, it's like, I think we've let each other go into the depth of our soul and heart. And in that, it's like we feel and see aspects that have been hidden from everybody else, you know, and we're constantly kind of going, hey, come out. And it's challenging because there's a part that wants to go, I don't want to come out, you know, I don't, you know, and so say it again.
Not safe out there. I don't want to come out.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and so I feel like I'm constantly, I guess, using that relationship as a mirror to go, hey, where do I need to work on today to refine? And some days I'm doing really, really well, and other days I'm not, you know, and I'm not making myself feel bad about it, but I'm just going, okay, this part needs more time. It needs more work. I'm seeing patterns that have come from my parents and grandparents, and they're deep, and I'm not going to just change them in a minute, you know? So it's like, okay, deep breath in, come back.
You know, I'm just like sitting here. Yeah, anyone who's actually watching the video here on YouTube, I'm just like nodding and yes, like fist pumping, because for so many things, but one, those survival codes, which we all have because we have that human element to our spirituality, are so alive in all of us. And if we think they're not, well, that's a blind spot that we've yet to explore. But what I love about what you've shared, and I'm so grateful that you shared it, even at the height and the level of your expertise and your skill set, is, and I'm so grateful, and I'm genuinely saying thank you, thank you, thank you, is I have, as I coach coaches now, and do coaching to the general public, what I see so many people being in resistance to is the fact that change and expansion and unfolding is an ongoing game. And people who tell you it's done in an instant, yes, we change in moments, multiple moments, and we can have big seismic shifts in any instant. But it's also sometimes an ongoing muscular pattern that we have to rewire and face off with again and again and again, and that's okay. And so I love that you're sharing that, sometimes it's like years in the making. And I know for myself, some of the stuff that I'm now dealing with years into the process, it's still the stuff I was talking about a year ago. And yes, I've evolved, and yes, I've gotten better, but I still have to be aware and attuned. And sometimes people looking out from the outside might go, oh well, obviously the growth work's not working if you're still working on that. And I sometimes get a bit frustrated about that, because I'm like, that's not how it is, right? It's the same way with the body. We keep it firm and toned and nourished on a daily basis by the actions that we take, the food we eat, and the movements we make. And I think without, as you said, soul and spirit and all the layers to our dimensions, that's an ongoing conversation. And I think that for the listeners and for myself even today, it's really lovely to hear someone speak to that, just as you did. So thank you.
And also, I think what people don't understand is that we go through 7-year cycles, and in that 7-year cycles, the body changes in a way, but also each 7 years makes you go back to earlier times. So you're constantly revisiting earlier time in your life and having to touch and deal with things that you couldn't have dealt with at that point in your life.
Yes, that is such a valid point. And the best way I can describe that to people is, when you read a book or you watch a movie or you even hear a talk or a training the second time or the third time, and you're like, oh my gosh, it lands at a whole nother level of understanding that you read the same book or you heard the same thing before, but until it's like that onion layer, until you had that awareness or that understanding of that first thing and the second thing, you have no concept of the deepest meaning of that until you're ready to receive it, which is why we need to keep showing up in growth work, because there's always more layers. Yes, I agree. So, okay, back to the rapid fire. What would you, if we could put either a message in the bottle, although that sounds like a bit of an outdated concept. So let's say we were going to put an ear wig into the ears of every human on the planet, and this is going to be Inna's, one sentence or 15-second little bit where she gets to drop straight into the subconscious of everybody with her kind of like one thing about life that she's discerned as true, or what she's learned, or what she wants them to know. I know this is a big question, but it doesn't matter, what we come up with. And of course it's editable later. But what would you say right now is the thing that you wish all the people on the planet just knew was true, because it feels really true for you?
I think it's more that what I would say to each person is, it's time for you to think for yourself. Can you take yourself out of the, global mentality and actually ask yourself questions about, what do I think and believe, and is there more?
Yes. Every part of my cell is a yes to that. Yes. Go within before we go without. All right. What would be your top book recommendation that impacted your life, aside from your own? Because obviously I'm sure they were big missions, and thank you for writing them. But what one book would you suggest to people who are starting this journey, whatever, just your favorite book or most impactful book?
It's such a hard question, because at different times, different books have impacted me the most.
One, I don't mind. We'll add them all to the show notes.
I think what's impacted me the most in the last 5 years has been the work of Rudolf Steiner. So his understanding, coming from both the scientific and the spiritual perspectives, have had the deepest, most profound impact on how I've changed and understood things, everything from health to spirituality to, the subtle bodies and how they work, to what is required to awaken your, your heart chakra, and, connecting back to my own work. So that's been the deepest impact. I'm not sure that that's where you start, So, his most basic books are Theosophy and How to Know Higher Worlds, but there's nothing basic about his work. It's very deep and profound, and you absolutely have to be ready for it. But the books that are more basic that earlier on had, or the book that I would say a really big impact on me was 12 Stages of Healing. I can't remember who the author is right now, but
I know
the reason for that, sorry?
I know the one you mean. I'm also drawing a blank, but we'll put the show notes.
Yeah, because it went through the different stages of healing and understanding that we cannot jump steps. And so I think that unless you've done massive amount of work on yourself, start with 12 Stages of Healing. If you haven't, then try, explore Theosophy. Mm-hmm. I've also just created this mystical healing reading cards, and again, for people who want to go a bit deeper, there's a lot of high level,
just that too, yeah.
There's a lot of high level concepts and understandings that I put into this card deck. I also have, which I don't have it here, but I had Heal Yourself card deck, which also has many explorations and understandings. So, that, I guess those are the things that I'm exploring. I keep writing and doing new things and creating ways for people to connect. And people at different levels.
Yes. That's so true. So then what would be your number one recommendation that we could do today, anybody who was looking to enhance their energy? What's one thing they could do today?
The one thing that I would say is stand up and just move your body, shake your body, and then the other thing that I'm big into is color, because color is so easy to do, and I can just rub my hands together, visualize, let's say, an orange ray of light, and start to breathe it in and move it through my body and embrace it and take it on board, and kind of soul food.
Yes, and that is a practice actually that you describe in your books. I mean, your books are full of so many actionables, which is what I love about them. So, I mean, obviously, I'm going to do the plug for you, but they should definitely go and get the book and have a good read. And basically what's cool about your books is you don't have to read it front to back. It really is a reference tool that you go pick it up again and pick it up again. Okay, what would you say is the number one thing people could do today to experience more empowerment?
I feel like more empowerment is reconnecting to the heart, and actually going, what? How does my heart feel? Is it numb? Is it full of life? If I could ask my heart one question, what is it that would make you open more? What would it be?
Such a great question. So ask your heart, what is it that would make you open more, and what would that be? I love that. I love that. I love that. Thank you. And then one thing that people could do today to enhance their expression in the world, the way they come out into the world after they've generated that energy and dropped into embodiment and empowerment, what would you suggest they do as a practice or an idea for expression?
My big one that I have to practice as well, especially with, people closest to me, it's think before you speak, right? So when I say that, the thought is, what is the result that I would like to get from this sharing? And if you think about it first, as opposed to just going blah, I just want to say this is my truth, but somebody else's truth is not the same as your truth.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would say is, can you realize that we all have our own truths, and can you actually express something in a way that doesn't attack, but in a way that allows the other person to discover what they feel and how they want to share things and hold the space. And so if I think about the fact that I just want harmony, then I'm going to speak very differently to if I just want to say whatever I want to say.
Yeah. So that sounds to me like being really intentional before we project potentially. I like that so much. And I like also what I'm hearing, which would be really relevant to me too, is and all of us, I'm sure, but really seeking to be heard, but not necessarily to be right. So leaving space for the conversation, which I think, look, on a collective level, if we all do that more, we're going to heal the world, right? So yes, your opinion is valid, but it isn't the only opinion. But so much of what you've shared today, thank you, about, as I said, I was so excited coming on today, not because, you're so aligned in my philosophy, which always feels nice though, but because we're different and yet we've come to the same realizations. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes that's nice in life, isn't it? To kind of go, we didn't know each other beforehand, but everything that you're teaching, I'm a big yes for. In you do it in your way, and it's just so. I don't know, it gets me excited, when it's like, yes, all of these things, going within first and finding that sovereign soul's voice, and then making sure that that it's valuable and bringing it into the world. And all of that is just a big yes from me. So, Inna, thank you so much for today. Now, as we wrap up, obviously we're going to link to everything. And I'm highly suggesting that, especially the listeners who feel called, and especially people who are like, that's curious to me, act on that, because that is a part of you that is saying, there's more here, there's more here. So go and check out Inna's work and connect with her. But is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to, maybe you just feel called to share, or something, a final, comment before we wrap up? I'm going to leave the floor open for you.
Yeah, I think the final comment is for me is to really go, if you want to know who you are, you must start learning about who you are as a soul and a spirit, and learning why we're here, because it's not random. And when you learn about it, you become much more confident, much more strong, much more empowered and inspired in your life, because you're not just, people who understand don't get depressed, because you realize shadow and light have to work together. It's the dark and the light is part of the journey, and that we're here for a reason. Everything's connected, nothing is random. And when you understand the deeper aspects of your soul and who you are and what is possible, who you can be, how you can develop yourself, I think it becomes really, really exciting. And that the material world is there for a reason, and we do need to explore it, and we need to make money, we need to eat, but there's so much more. And the spiritual riches are the ones that you need to spend more time on, the eternal stuff.
Yeah. I work a lot with people around purpose, and people often malaligned or on the wrong path, due to the conditioning of society. And I hold the belief that everybody does have a purpose. Is that a belief that you also hold? That we all have a purpose here?
Absolutely. And I'd love to have a deeper discussion with you on that point, but I'm also aware that I've got to pick up my daughter and
yes, school pickup. So thank you for showing us that we all have priorities in life, and pointing out yours very clearly to us. I love that. You are a mum as well as someone who is making massive waves in the world and doing so much good. So Inna, thank you for the work you do in the world, truly. And thank you for your time today and for sharing your wisdom and your insights with us. I'm sure everybody got lots of value today. If you did, guys, then please, screenshot the episode, tag Inna, tag myself. Let us know what you thought was valuable, what your biggest takeaway was, what words of wisdom that Inna dropped that you were just like, that's a big yes from me, because that helps all of us get this message of self-awareness and love and light into the world, so that more people can be living on purpose and living to their fullest potential. Anna, thank you. And yes, go and get your daughter and stay safe in these crazy times, but big loves. And again, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you.